People are influenced by the kind of information they get. And so with the CSI shows, all of the forensic shows on television, people think they're learning what forensic science and forensic investigation is all about. Been part of a death investigation team, for example, or been a researcher for a forensic psychologist for the courtroom. I now believed I can bring this into the classroom, and it's real.
The audio for this clip was horrendous, so I'll fill you in here. It states that Katherine still brings a very real hands-on experience to her students. On this day, one of her classes is setting up a crime scene, an activity that Katherine says allows them to be creative and take the lead in their own learning process. We have this mannequin. Another class will be solving the crime. Here are the parameters. Go for it. The students come up with a scenario, planted evidence like fingerprints, footprints, and then strategically place the victim in a way that reflects the crime. She says they're learning to think their way through a reconstruction. The student goes on to say, we have a chance to look at the crime both before and after, considering how investigators go about solving these crimes. We work on profiling. Another says it's a teaching style that students enjoy, one that is based on experience. Another student says, all of our textbooks are ones that she helped write or she knows people that have written them. It's not that she is just reading the text back to you. She knows. She has a lot of insight and first-hand experience in the cases she assigns. Another student says, it's great. Imagine reading a book and then having the author to ask questions from every week. Another faculty states, we're fortunate to have her on our faculty because she is a rare combination of a true academic, a very intelligent woman, who has talents that are so broad and deep and bring the outside world into the DeSales University classroom.
So here's me at our crime scene house. As I mentioned, I teach forensic psychology. I'm also the assistant provost at my university. And we have a crime scene house where we lay out all kinds of scenes and whatnot to teach students about crime scene investigation. So the psychology side comes up with the scenario, the criminal justice side usually does the investigations. These are just a few of the 68 books that I've published, many of which are on serial killers, a history of serial murder, forensic innovations. The latest one is How to Catch a Killer, which is 30 serial killers and how they were caught.
Hello all, and welcome back to Mind Juice. I did not initially intend on making this into a two-part series, yet after having already released the How to Get Away with Murder episode last week, I have found myself with a lot more intriguing information, and thus thoughts, that I have come across regarding Dr. Katherine Ramsland, and I propose that she will indeed be a major player in the case as it goes forward. Now, in part one, I presented certain aspects that may lend to be a beneficial arc for Bryan and his defense team to consider, not directly stating that I believe that he will get away, but instead seeking to outline potential areas of defense that could reasonably raise doubt. But I feel she would be just advantageous for the state and prosecution side. Thus, I'm attesting that we will see her involved in the trial in a professional sense. That is, not so much her relationship to or with Kohberger as a past professor. But I cannot go so far as to suggest what side. They're both equally plausible for the state's expert witness as well as for the defense's expert witness. It all depends how she perceives this case professionally, determines how she can mentally and or wants to, and then elects to offer her expertise. It could honestly be for either side. But whoa, how big of a weight to have on one side or the other? Think about it. I believe she could and can create reasonable doubt with a jury for a defense purpose. And further, that could just as likely be the closer for the prosecution side. Her knowledge and expertise in forensic psychology will and would have a profound effect on the jury. I know I have heard she is gagged per the court order, yet I am not certain of this. She very well could be. Either way, she isn't talking. Respectfully, she shouldn't feel as though she should. We need to understand her role in this case potentially, and give her the space and respect she deserves. We'll hear from her again someday. There's no doubt about that. With that said, I began this episode with a clip from Dr. Ramsland from about 15 to 16 years ago, then phased in one from about a year ago, demonstrating that she still partakes in crime scene reconstruction type activities with her students. Personally, I think these look pretty cool. I can see how and what one could learn from said experience. But at the same time, unfortunately, further considering said opportunity such creates to one whom is developing into an eventual predator, one can see how this could also serve their purposes as well. As you will see, Dr. Katherine Ramsland has dedicated the last several decades in her career towards the forensic type of work. Forensic psychology, psychiatry. She is literally a forensic psychological pioneer with a career of dedication on this very matter. Spent studying and researching way before CSI even gained legitimacy, then eventually used as part of what we understand today as the modern crime scene investigation tactics. She's a true legend and GOAT, if you ask me. Her work is beyond impressive. So why do I keep on gloating about her achievements, which many of us already know? And further, how does this have anything to do with how to get away with murder? Well, I'll tell you. I believe Dr. Katherine Ramsland is about to play a major role in this case going forward. I genuinely do. After all the research I have done, time spent taking in her knowledge and top-notch level of expertise, who better to explain said concepts to a jury than the international expert herself, Dr. Katherine Ramsland. Now, before we move on with the spotlight on the doctor, let me remind everyone, Bryan's initial reaction to law enforcement upon being arrested. It is interesting to consider along with today's discussion. This article here. Bryan Kohberger initially agreed to speak to law enforcement, then invoked right to counsel, per a lawyer. He initially waived his right to counsel and agreed to speak with law enforcement following his arrest, but then he requested an attorney, according to the public defender representing him in Pennsylvania. He's calm. He's fully aware. It's obvious he's very intelligent. Labar, Kohberger's public defender, stated that Kohberger spoke with law enforcement for 15 minutes at the Pennsylvania State Police Barracks following his arrest. Initially, Kohberger waived his Miranda rights, but then requested an attorney, Labar said. Kohberger told him that police asked him, his client, if he understood what was going on, and he responded by saying something to the effect of, "Yes, certainly I am aware of what's going on. I'm 10 miles away from this." Then Labar said Kohberger invoked his right to counsel and asked for an attorney. He's getting arrested in Pennsylvania, and that's his response. "Yes, certainly I'm aware of what's going on. I'm 10 miles away from this." Aren't you, shocked that you're arrested? What an odd response.
Well, for dum-dums like me, can you explain what forensic psychology is?
Forensic psychology is anywhere that psychology crosses paths with the investigation and court system. So anytime, most forensic psychologists tend to do things like competency, mental state at the time of the offense, so assessments for the court, but you could also be a consultant. I actually consult on death investigations. I do police trainings. I talk about profiling and psychological autopsy, which is a class in dangerous minds that I teach at the undergraduate and graduate level, and that is really about extreme offenders, which is mass murderers, spree killers, and serial killers. So that's primarily what I do most of my work on, and most of what the students want from me. That class fills up very quickly. I spent 5 years talking with Dennis Rader, the BTK serial killer, because he defies many of the formulas. So I thought that was interesting. I wanted to know more about that. And I think I'm always looking for the outliers rather than the ones that fit the mold. I want to see the ones that don't fit the mold and how did they get to be the way they are. And in psychology, as opposed to criminology, we're looking more at the cases, the individual details of someone's life story and the trajectory, basically. Whereas in criminology, you're looking more at groups and trends and statistics and things like that. I'm much more interested in just the case details. So that's why I like talking to people who are willing to explore how they got to be the way they are. And, I can spend many hours doing that. So I didn't choose it, but I'm really happy I'm in this field.
I want to be clear. I cannot assert as to what side she will intervene. I would hope it's for the state and prosecution. For just within a professional sense, not even considering that he was her student, just from a professional understanding, reputation on the matter, her insight is, I believe, the best way possible to try and explain the development and trajectory that would lead someone to do this. Why? Potential motive. She did narrow down BTK's motive, which he wasn't even aware of himself. She discovered his factor X, so they call it. This is what she in fact loves doing, lives for, understanding the outliers, how, why, when, etc. Now, for BTK, he wanted very much to take the case to trial. He loved this media attention. However, it was the request of his daughter for him not to put his family through this that ended up being the reason why he elected to plead guilty, and thus not put his family through the turmoil. He has no remorse for what he had done, yet he does have regret of what he had caused to now affect his family for the rest of their lives. This isn't my opinion. This is through the research and BTK saying so himself. This just didn't occur to him as a legitimate potential consequence because he truly didn't believe he would ever get caught. This is that narcissistic immunity that happens. In terms of Bryan, in my opinion, I believe that he was setting out to be a serial killer. You don't have to agree with me, but just hear me out. Let's take a shot at what his motive may be, considering the rest I have to present here. Let's take a step back to the next day, upon learning of 4 victims allegedly stabbed to death in their sleep, in a small, quaint college town, on Greek Sorority Row. This isn't supposed to happen. A quadruple homicide. What type of person does it take to commit an act such as this? 4 victims by knife. From what appears to be a stranger, at least to the occupants of the house. Sure, he was one of their stalkers maybe, or they knew of him but didn't directly know him. They weren't on friendship terms, I think that's fair to say. What then drives him to commit the acts he does, and in turn respond the way he has up until this point?
He didn't have that to worry about. Really, even though 1991 was his last victim, DNA was just beginning to be used, and it was expensive, and so that wouldn't have gone into his thinking at all, as opposed to somebody today who would know, about the much more sophisticated techniques we have, and that would be a person who either feels, might be very mentally ill or feel very compelled and narcissistically believes they're untouchable, they're smarter than the cops and whatnot. So that's the kind of person I would expect would go ahead and do this kind of thing. Around the world, we still see a lot of serial killers too. There's one theory that I know of that claims the golden age, the 60s, 70s, 80s, was the golden age of serial killers. And in part, that's because that was the big media focus. It was fascinating. There was Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, the Zodiac, all these big time names that we're very familiar with. And the ones that we hear about now don't have that star quality. So they're still out there. They're still being covered by media, but not in the way that they were in the 70s and 80s. So in part, it's because we have a very different media approach to them. Yes, I think there's some decline. I'm not sure I would say it's a significant decline, but certainly forensics has made a difference, especially in those predators who study how to get away with murder. Okay. Do I think, have I come face to face with psychopaths? Absolutely. The coldness, the lack of remorse, definitely. So some people call that evil, but we are finding that it might very well be a brain disorder. Finds, around the world, they're doing this work now. The brains of what we call primary psychopaths, who seem to be born with this brain disconnect, are definitely different. And it allows them to be better predators if that's what they choose to be. Not all psychopaths are criminals, not all psychopaths are murderers, but if they choose that, it allows them to be very effective at it because they really don't have any remorse over what they're doing. And they really can be very calculated. They tend to be very reward driven. So the brain is different.
Now, I know a bunch of you are jumping to conclusions and saying, how can you call him a psychopath? He's innocent until proven guilty. And again, I respect that. These are my opinions and not intended to be anything but. Okay, it's supposed to be educational, thought-provoking adult conversation. With that said, if you do enjoy the content, please give the thumbs up button some love and double down and subscribe if you haven't already. Now, I want to use BTK as an example to compare to Bryan. Not literally, but given the work that Ramsland has done with BTK, project how this might and would look if she were to do the same with Bryan. Listen to how she's approached BTK. What was her aim? What was her purpose?
50s, 60s, 70s already thinking about serial killers, even though nobody's even using that terminology. He's reading True Detective magazines. He sees the Harvey Glattman pictures of the women bound, and for the photographer who know they're going to die. And I think he's about 14 when he saw that. So he's developing sexually, and that became the image seared into his brain for the most high erotic experience he could imagine. Around the same time, the in cold blood murders, the Clutter murders, happened in Kansas, about 200 miles to the west of him. He was in a car with a girl he had a crush on when that came over the radio. So that, feeds into it as well. And many of the things that happened at the Otero house, by the way, are very much a shadow of the Clutter family murders, including the pillow under the head, by the way. So,
upon hearing Dr. Ramsland discuss in depth how certain events intermingled with and throughout BTK's sexual development as a young man, it made me ponder. I know Bryan's sister was in that horror flick 2 days back in 2011, wherein campers are attacked by a knife-wielding madman. This was taking place during Bryan's adolescence. No, I am not stating directly this is why, just pondering. But we know from the TAPTA documents regarding his struggles with visual snow, not feeling whole, life is like a video game, feeling numb, detached, etc., which to me personally just sounds like a journal entry while someone is ripped high on heroin, but who am I to say? Back to the point. During this time, he was, 16 to 17 years old? It would be natural for him to want to seek out, develop an intimate relationship with a female. But as we know, he was socially awkward, didn't have the best social skills, etc. During this time of puberty, maturation into a man, his beautiful sister was starring in a horror flick wherein a knifed madman attacked them. Did this sinister plot idea mesh with Bryan's development, his angst, frustration of not being able to achieve what he wanted? Therefore, this horror flick kind of meshing with a possible solution in his warped mind? Interesting thought, huh?
Some of these serial killers like Rader, when he put the pillow under the victim's head before he killed him, what's that about?
Well, he likes to say he's a good guy who did some bad things.
What was it like working with him over those years?
It was actually, I still talk to him. We've been corresponding for 10 years now. He had this brilliant concept. He thinks I made it up, but he made it up, called cubing. And the idea is that you're all sides of the cube and you can slide onto any side. So one side says family man, one side says churchgoer, one side is thief, one side is serial killer. So you get whatever context you need, because emotionally they're not grounded deeply in any given identity the way most of us are. Like if you do something uncharacteristic, you feel it like, ew, that's weird. That's not really me. They don't feel that at all, because all they care about is what will get them what they want. And if they need to act this way, so they're actors. If they need to act this way to get this, they will. And it doesn't matter to them. And they have no sense of who they might hurt in the process.
Now, this concept of cubing, too, is very intriguing because I think we can all relate to the overall idea here. That is, if you think about it, when you are at your place or get dressed up for church or arrive at your daily job or are out at a concert ready to soak in your favorite artist, we all cube and or act a certain way determinant upon the context. For instance, there are things you would say or do while watching TV at home alone versus standing in line at the grocery store. We all have a certain degree of self we manipulate given different contexts, settings, circumstances. Now, that's normal for people because they have an internal locus of control, an authentic grounding in morals and principles of fair and safe society that we use to navigate around life, acting as our compass. However, for those that are detached or do not have an internal locus of control, founded on the morals, laws, and ethics of society like the rest of us, they still cube, just in an absolute extreme degree. Although Ramsland discusses it within working with BK, I believe the same will apply with Bryan. Just look at his exchanges as Papa Roger, inside looking, versus what his students thought of him as a TA, versus what his friends growing up have said about him, or how he exchanged conversations with his neighbor just recently after the murders, commenting that he thought they didn't have a suspect. Straight cubing. I mean, look at him in the traffic stop with the Indiana trooper. He was the PhD son, cross-country trekking for the holidays with his father, back home to the Pocono Mountains up in Pennsylvania. Or so he'd like to make you think.
I was interested in this idea of somebody who can seem normal. He had a full-time job. He was out in the public. He was president, vice president, and then president of his church congregation. He went to church regularly, prayed with people, went to Bible studies, went with his wife, had a wife and family, and all of that. But at the heart of who he identified himself as was this hot sense of, I'm most alive when I'm stalking potential victims and killing them, binding and killing them. And he came up with this, we call that compartmentalization, but I like this word better. It's easier to spell.
And he's like,
cubing.
I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea what you mean. He just had complete wall that he had actually hurt his daughter in that way. He can watch a character say those things. You cannot hear his daughter say those things. And then he got really angry at me. There were a few times like that he didn't like being called on what clearly was going on. We played chess games. One chess game went like 3 years. I didn't care if I won. I cared what would he say about certain moves? How was he going to come back at me? What was going to happen? I mean, his first words to me were, now don't cheat. Like, okay, you're a serial killer. I'll cheat if I want to. And start my serial killers class with the top 20 myths about serial. These are the things you think you know about serial killers, thanks to the media. And you have to get these out of your minds right now if we're going to do any good work in this class. And it's unfortunate, but that they can't stop. They never stop. And that's another one. They want to get caught. Oh, I hate that one so much. Because there's a stupid Freudian interpretation of, he didn't want to get caught. He wanted to keep doing what he liked doing. So there's very few. You have the lipstick killer, catch me before I kill again. You have a few like that. And some of them have turned themselves in. But the percentage of serial killers out there do not want to get caught. If they do make mistakes, it's not because they want to get caught subconsciously.
I know that.
Because people have a hard time with the idea that they don't feel guilty. But they don't. So if it's not what I would do or think or feel, then nobody does. And that's an unfortunate part of being human. And if you're going to do good work in this field at all, you must get out of that mind frame in order to get into the mind frame of someone else. So working with Rader, for example, it had to be, I needed to be able, not think like him. That's another myth, that the killers have to be so close to being a serial killer in order to catch them. That's another stupid thing that's out there. And I don't have to think like him, but I have to allow him his space and how he talks. I had one law enforcement officer in Wichita say to me after the book came out, well, you didn't make him tell you the truth. I said, well, that was your job. I'm in psychology. His lies are equally important as behavior to me. as any truth he might say, because I'm trying to get his whole world. You're only trying to get his confession. That's a big difference.
Yeah. And yeah.
I do believe she will become a major player, both during and throughout the trial, as an expert witness, and further after the fact, if you really think about it. She'll probably be the one who authors the best book written on this horrible tragedy, which will then in turn get the movie rights. It's just the reality. Look where the case is. In fact, if I was a gambling man, I'd reckon she becomes an expert witness for the state, helps get him convicted, then after 5 years or so, she'll do the same type of work with Bryan as she did with BTK, discussing how, why, really getting to know and understand Bryan, then coming out with a literature book in peace that encompasses her experience as his professor at the master's level, then becoming a part of defense, then being the one to talk it through with him after he's convicted, or a part of the prosecution, until innocent until proven guilty. Yes, you need not tell me. I think he did it. Time will tell. He wanted this all along. Not to be caught so soon as he did, but to be an object of study by whom other than the world-renowned expert herself, his past professor, Dr. Ramsland. Remember, the Taft papers back when he was, 17, he expressed how no one could understand him. He wants and desires to become the object of study by his previous professor. Meanwhile, getting all the attention from the women that are into people like this, as he so knew would come and has. I will continue to refine my craft until I get caught, but I won't because I'm that good and smarter than everyone else. The knife sheath left behind was 100% accident. I believe that at this point. Now, we do know per the PCA and the phone records, he was visiting or in the area of the King Road residence approximately 12 times in the months leading up to the events, as well as the car being caught in surveillance and consistent patterns with the phone records. If we presume that he was indeed stalking these girls, as I believe he in fact was, listen to what the doctor has to say here.
But we are engaged by people who planfully craft what they're going to do to somebody, stalk them, keep their focus on them, because that's part of it. It's also the vampire myth, that total focus on the person he's going after. I think there's a real erotic attraction in that. So of that subset of serial killers, we then look at how they developed, and many of them did develop a fantasy life that became rehearsal fantasies for what they expected to do or wanted to do. Certainly, Bundy described it. Right. And I think the ones who are stalking, because not even all sexually compelled serial killers are stalkers. The ones who are stalking are really planning. I mean, they're living what they're going to do 24/7. This is exciting to them. This is where they feel alive, no matter what they're doing, whether you're president of your church congregation and a family man. If you feel most alive when you are looking for a victim and planning your murders, that's your fantasy life. And I think that is a rehearsal fantasy, because much of what we see in what they did actually do is matched by what they talk about.
Again, for becoming the predator, and learning and taking those stages. Yes. But especially now that or do you feel like me? I think it still comes down to tried and true detective work. Like when we look at,
I think it comes down to, the book that's coming out in July is How to Catch a Killer. And it's 30 serial killer cases. A number of them are about really solid detective work. A number of them about the killers making mistakes or turning themselves in, but quite a few are really outstanding police work. And that's really what happens. Maybe that's what Jack the Ripper did, for all we know, because he might have studied the police beats at that time. They were very uniform. You could have studied them and figured out when was an opportune moment. So I think we're still seeing people clever like that, but among those who are careless or delusional or impulsive, they're going to get caught. Yeah. He took women into wilderness areas where nobody went. And he could have gotten away with that.
There's always that one mistake, right? And then, I wrote a script a long time ago, and I'd love to do it in the future, but it's like, when somebody tries to, commit or think of that perfect murder, there's always something that, they can't predict, a neighbor coming or, something happening that.
Well, that's what happened to Rader. I mean, he was lucky most of the time. He didn't get caught, not skillful. Well, exactly. There's a thing called narcissistic immunity that develops in these guys when they don't get caught. They're already narcissists. It's a short step to thinking, I'm untouchable, I'm special, I'm destined. And even if they arrest me, they can't keep me. He displays that attitude as much as Bundy does. He definitely had that. And so there is that sense because he's gotten away with it for a long time.
One of the things about BTK is which is one of the things that I was exploring, is the way he believes certain things about himself that you can kind of see aren't true. He talks about leaving nothing to chance, how careful he was in surveilling this house and knowing who was living there, but he did not know that they had 3 other children who were also at school that day. He did not know that Joseph Otero was home that day. It's January. He's going to leave footprints in the snow. They had a guard dog that he didn't know about. And he's entering this home in the middle of the day. So this idea that he's hyper careful and leaves nothing to chance is completely undermined by so many things that you see, right here in this house.
The intent and purpose behind this episode was to hopefully share some Ramsland insight work for everyone to learn from, enjoy as much as I did, in trying to better understand this case. Again, I'm not asserting that anything presented is fact, what is actually going on. They're only presumptions. But once you really get to hear her speak, her knowledge, it's definitely hard not to be able to understand or see how Bryan came up with the plan that he did, or I guess not, maybe. It's interesting, though. Now, out of fairness and respect to Dr. Ramsland, I think it is important to also present this side of her as well.
Does that affect you at all for doing research like that? Or do you compartmentalize? Or how does it, does it affect you at all? Anything?
Well, people ask me that a lot. I approach, because I've studied hundreds of serial killers. So he's not the worst by any means that I've ever studied. But to me, it's more clinical. I don't go into it as like a true crime junkie, or, some people call themselves, or aren't serial killers cool. I don't think they are. I also talk to the victims' family members. So I'm well aware of the horrible things he did, and not just to the victims, but, subsequently fragmenting and destroying families, his own family, because he had kids and a wife. And so I always keep in mind the destructiveness of what they've done. I don't think they're cool. I don't think this is a really neat thing. I don't think about, I comfort myself with serial killer documentaries like you kind of see out there. It's never been that to me. For me, it's clinical.
All right, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this content. Pulling it from a lot of videos. I will attach all of these in the video description. Also, if you want to stick around, the last clip that I play is of Dr. Ramsland plugging her show that is apparently for free on Roku if you have it, called Murder House Flip. I haven't watched it yet, but it sounds interesting. I'm going to check it out. So I just added that here on the end in case any of you guys are interested, to give you a quick trailer for that. But until next time, everybody, let's keep active in that comment section. Please subscribe if you haven't. Hit the like and thumbs up. And until next time, Mind Juice out.
And it's in its 2nd season. So that's a show that came out of one of my classes.
Well, explain that to us. What's Murder House Flip? Somebody got murdered in a house?
It's a design show where you take a house where a murder has occurred, and we redesign it to heal the murder space so the family that owns it can be more comfortable in their home.
No kidding.
Yeah,
That's a hard sell, isn't it?
Oh, they said that everyone loved it. We pitched it everywhere. it was a blast. We had one season already. Dorothy Puente's house, who's the serial killer who ran a boarding house and buried 7 bodies in her yard. We redid their yard for them. It's beautiful. So yeah, it's great.
And you guys are working. You said
we're
working on a season 2 for that now, huh?
Yeah, the houses have already been filmed.
No kidding. And where's that aired at?
Well, it started on Quibi. If you know the streaming service Quibi, they took a dive during the pandemic, and we thought we were going to lose it. But then Roku bought everything of Quibi, so it's on Roku Originals now.
Nice.